Welcome everybody to the only guide you'll ever need on Pathfinder Wrath of the Righteous. A while ago when the game was announced, I did a guide on the Pathfinder Kingmaker system, assuming most of the mechanics would be the same, and they are. So if you want to watch a 1 hour guide on those systems that I'm going to talk about here, feel free to do so. The video is going to be in the description below. This guide is going to be much faster, and I'm gonna touch on maybe less things, but I'm gonna talk about everything that's really important to you. So without further ado, let's get into the guide. The first thing you're gonna be hit with when you log on into the game is the difficulty settings. I'll go ahead and say that the game is fairly difficult, not because of its actual difficulty, but because of the amount of mechanics that go into it. If you're starting the Pathfinder system and everything, I recommend playing on casual or normal, one of those two here. You'll notice that once you go higher, the game warns you that you're about to make a mistake. Note that all of these settings can be changed in the menus while you're playing the game, you just won't be getting the achievements, I believe. But that's not that bad. You can always replay the game because the game has a fantastic replayability factor. The next thing you're gonna find yourself in front of is the character creation. Now, anything I say here can be taken back in the game. You can respec your character anytime you want. The only downside of it is that you won't have the equipment for the assigned new class. But you can solve that problem by hoarding a bunch of equipment, I suppose. Now that you don't have to worry, let's talk about it, stress-free. I would suggest picking a class that speaks to you. Why? Because if not, you're probably gonna get bored of the game. The game is very long and you don't want to get bored of your own character. That's also why I don't recommend following builds online, at least not blindly. Why? Because online builds usually requires you to multi-class and whatnot. They are made for mostly unfair, hard difficulties. So if you're not playing on those, you don't need. You can do just fine sticking to one class, like the Paladin here. Some classes that I do recommend for new players are, if you want to be a tank, I would recommend the Tower Shield Specialist Fighter. Why? Because the fighter is fairly simple to understand. It's really strong. It can do literally anything. It has some flavor, not the best, but you know you will not go wrong, at least until you learn what makes a good tank a good tank. If you want to be a DPS instead, I recommend maybe two-handed fighter or mutated warrior. Those are, once again, fighter subclasses, or just the fighter himself. Why? Because once again, they are good at literally anything that is martial combat. Therefore, you can't go wrong with them. If you don't feel like being the fighter, I would also recommend the Barbarian, which once again has a lot of subclasses, like the Armored Oak, which makes him wear armor, or the Mad Dog that gives him a dog. Now, why this class? Because you'll see big numbers, it's really simple, you rage, you walk in, you hit. But once again, very powerful, and your constitution is very high, so you can take a beating, which you certainly will in the first few times of the game. If instead of being in the melee, you want to be from afar, volleying your enemies with arrows, the Ranger is the guy for you. It's a bow expert that also has some divine casting, so you can learn about a bit of every mechanic in the game. Demon Slayer, for example, has divine casting. If divine casting and small spells aren't enough for you, and you want a full-on caster, the best arcane caster I can recommend for new beginners is the Sorcerer, mainly the Sylvan Sorcerer, which gets an animal companion. Now, why is the Sylvan Sorcerer easier than the rest of the arcane classes? Well, most other arcane classes get a gimmicky damage abilities, like the Witch or the Kineticist, which I won't talk about right now. Others get the Spellbook, like the Arcanist and the Wizard. The problem with the Spellbook is that you need to keep constant track of it. You need to adjust it every sleep, and you will forget about it for sure. The sorcerer is really easy. You just choose which spell you're gonna get each level, and then you just get them, and you don't have to make any choices. You also get more spell slots than the wizards and whatnot, which means you have more room for errors. Now, I hope this helps you with your class choosing. I do have a video going over every class and their flavor. There are a lot of classes. Obviously, I'm not going to do this right here, but feel free to go watch this video. And yeah, good character creating. It is a blast. Okay, let's get into the guide where I talk about the actual mechanics now. The first one we're going to touch on is the stats and the rolls, especially the attack rolls, saving throws, and check rolls. Now, the game relies heavily on dice rolls. Why? Because the tabletop counterpart does too. So the game randomly generates a number between 1 and 20 for most of the action you'll make into the game. So you might ask, well, if a dice does all the calculations, why do I have strength and weaknesses in my stats? Well, that is simply because the stat give a flat bonus to your rolls. The modifier is this flat bonus. So here is the stat and here are the modifiers. The higher your stat is, the higher your modifier will be. So let's get into the rolls. The first one, the most important one you'll see, is the attack rolls. Now, if you wonder how it's all calculated, you can just hover here on the character select screen, or you can also go watch my other video that will be in the description below. Now, Sela's bonus, the paladin you get at the beginning of the game, is plus 10 at level 4. What does that mean? That means that if she needs to hit a 15 to hit an enemy, she could roll a 5 and she will get plus 10. Now, part of this bonus comes from her strength modifier here, that is a plus 4. Some comes from his weapon, some comes from their feats, and some comes from their straight level. Now, what are they rolling against when they roll to hit? It's the armor class. The armor class, once again, is calculated in a roundabout way. Dodge, shields focused, feats, equipment you'll get will all change the armor class. So, why is it difficult in Pathfinder? Because they decided to split it into 3 armor classes. The normal armor class, which is the one you'll use most of the time. The flat-footed armor class, which is basically if you start a round, you don't have your dexterity bonus to your armor class because it would make sense that you are unable to dodge. And touch AC, which is armor class. This is basically for spells that would make sense even if they touch your armor, that they would still connect. I'm talking here like inflict wounds, I'm talking here like raise spells and everything. It's also a bonus for wizards who don't get good bonuses to their hits. The next type of rolls that you'll have to do are saving throws. Saving throws are when a spells or an action would require you to get a status impairment. So let's say you get sick, or you get pushed over, or you get scared. So let's get into them. Once again, you can hover over them to see how they're calculated. The fortitude saving throw is basically going to be how sturdy you are if you get sick, if you get pushed around. If you have a good constitution, you won't. The reflex saving throws, which are based on dexterity, are basically how good you are at dodging. And the will saving throws, which are based on the wisdom, are basically mind affecting effect, like scaring someone. The other rolls you'll have are the skill rolls. Every skill is dependent on one of the modifiers you have. So let's say persuasion is dependent on charisma, while perception is dependent on wisdom. Those will be rolled at random times in the game, just as a DM would, so don't worry too much about them. Now, you understand that the game is basically trying to give yourself the best odds possible at every rolls, but that doesn't mean you'll always succeed. Sometimes you'll just get a streak of bad rolls and you'll have to restart, and that's fine. That's why the community encourages a lot of saves coming. The next mechanic we're going to talk about is the Spellbook. Now, if you remember, I talked about the sorcerer and how he didn't have one. And this is to save you all the headaches that this is going to be. For new players, because for experienced players, it is a lot of fun. So let's get into it. My main character here is a wizard, so he has a spellbook. The spellbook is under here. You can see all the spells I've learned for today by every level of spell. As I level up, I will get more and more spell slots. This means that I can just slot a spell here. Now you see the spell is grayed out. That means that until the next time I rest, I won't be able to use what I just put here. This also works if I change a spell like this. I won't be able to use this one or this one. Now that's a problem, but also really good. That means you can choose every spell you want. For every day, basically. You just need to change them before sleeping all the time, which can be a hassle to remember. Also, don't forget that you can put many copies of the same spells in the same spellbook. This means that if I would only have one of these, I will only be able to cast it once during the day. But since I have 3 of those, I can cast them 3 times. Now the big problem with this is that companions, even if they auto-level, won't have any spells here. As you'll notice, this was my first time through the game and I just took a random saves. And I forgot to give Sila's her spell slots. So let's fit Curate Moderate Wound, a Shaman ability, and let's say a Delay Poison or no, a Bark Skin here. That means that she'll be able to use 2 Cure Wounds per day. But every level gets additional spell slots as the game progresses. So I'm going to give her 2 Banes for the day. Now this is a problem because you can just forget to give characters their spell slots and they'll just never have them. It's also important to fit them every time. Now as you see, Ember here is a witch and she is a charisma caster just like the sorcerer. This means that she does not have a spellbook here. So if you don't want the hassle of it all, just don't have a spellbook. But it can also be very, very fun. As you see, as a wizard, I have a lot of spells and I can choose whichever one I want. Do I think I'll need magic missile? Will I need to run far? Will I need to crowd control people? Will I need to summon monsters? Will I need to make people sick? It's all very fun and I suggest you experiment with it a lot. Especially if you like spells in RPGs in general. Just don't forget to change them before you rest and to add them whenever you level up, please, because I've been there and I was just nerfing myself and you won't even know why. Now, welcome to the part you've all been waiting for, the combat, the only real part of the game. A few pieces of advice for combat. First off, you'll often see the enemies much before they see you. This means you can take your time to inspect them with this little toggle button. Now, if I right click on the spider, I will see what it's immune to, its AC is, and diverse stats. So let's dive into it. We can see that this spider is immune to mind affecting effects, compulsion effects, charm effects, and web effects incurred by the web spells. So, I know for sure I won't be using those against her. Most of the enemies in these games are demons. And demons are immune to a lot of magic. Also, to any physical damage that is not made by a magical or cold iron weapon. So make sure you have one of those in hand, and always inspect your enemies. The other thing this gives you a chance to do is pre-buff. Now here, my shaman has a spell. You can notice that if I cast it, and it will give a buff to all my allies, the spider doesn't notice. Another possible one is mage armor. I can give this to my mage and it's a free buff that I won't have to do during the fight. So let's get into it and see how it goes. You can see the spider move first because they rolled initiative and they're gonna get in range. Now I'm gonna show you something. You shouldn't ever bring your caster in melee, but just for the sake of time I'll show it right now. If you do this and you cast a spell towards another enemy, they will get an attack on you. That is because any ranged attack made in the range of someone will trigger an attack of opportunity, as well as walking away from them. So make sure you're always away from the enemies before fighting them. If you want to evade, but you can't really take a hit, you can do an acrobatic mobility under the abilities toggle bar, and this will make you move at half speed, but you will have less chance to provoking an attack of opportunity. Now, let's see how we roll for damage with my great archer. So, as you can see here, when you roll to hit, and then you roll for damage. Now, if you want to know every single thing that happens in this fight, you can look at the combat log on the side here. As you can see, Wenduag attacked the giant spider with the masterwork longbow, and it hit. Why did it hit? Because the armor class of the spider is 18, as signaled right here. And I have a 10 modifier, so I rolled an 11, which means 11 plus 10 is 21. Why do I have a 10 modifier? Well, it's all written here. You can find out different stuff. Usually it's gonna be feats, and it's gonna be equipment, but you can find everything here. And why is their armor class 18? Well, it's because they have a natural armor of 3, a dexterity bonus of plus 5, and the base armor is always going to be 10. Now for the damage, the longbow is 1d8 plus 5 because she has 5 dexterity, which is 9 piercing damage. Let's get into more turns. So the spider here hit. So she needed to hit a 22 to hit. And she rolled a 24 because she has a 6 modifier. Why does she have a 6 modifier? Because she is technically flanking with the other spider. Why are the spider flankings? Because they are next to one another and the target is right here. You see, she is kind of in between them. They also have a base attack bonus of plus 2 and a strength of plus 2 again. Now, they rolled an 18, which is really good. They probably shouldn't have hit it, but they did. And this is exactly why. So now let's go with Camellia and finish this fight here with all of the spider. Now you can see some of them will just miss most of the time. You can just hit a bad place where you're not gonna hit anything. That is just going to happen, sadly. But you can always restart, as I said earlier. So you can see here, I'm not being really lucky with my hit most of the times, but we ended up finishing them off. Now, you can't loot them if you can't loot them if you have inspect on, so I will toggle this off and I will check, and they don't have any loot. You can check, by the way, with the tab key. They would light up in yellow. But if they had loot, you could take it. Now, I don't recommend holding too much loot because of the next thing I'm going to talk about, which is encumbrance. When you carry too much, and this stat is dictated by your strength, you will become slower and you will fatigue faster. Fatiguing faster is a problem because you're going to need to rest more, and you don't want to rest too much because of the next one I'm going to bring up. So just make sure you don't get all the weapons and all the armor. As you can see, you can have accessories fine and ingredients and usables, but be careful on the weapons and armor. The only exception to this is the masterwork things, because the masterwork weapons, as we will check right away, are worth a lot of gold, so you might want to hoard those. So, you've had a few fights, and now you're out of spell slots, or your party is deeply injured, or even worse, they have status effect that make them worse. Well, you're just gonna have to rest. Now, how does resting work? It's a lot of word, it's a lot of reading. I'm not gonna get into it too much, but you can basically post someone to a few things in your resting, which is all great. The last game, to prevent resting, was time gated a lot. People didn't like that. Not really, because they felt rushed to the game. Now, in this game, there's a lot less time gating, but they added something called Abyssal Corruption to prevent you from cheesing, just resting literally all the time. Now, The problem with this is that the more you rest, the more debuffs you're gonna get. So at the first corruption, you're gonna get 50% chance to fail your arcane spell. This is insane. 15% chance that your spell just does not go off like last time. You're gonna get a -2 penalty to wisdom and intelligence, and a -3 penalty to combat maneuver defense and combat maneuver bonuses. This means you're gonna be easier to hit and harder to hit things. Therefore, you don't really want to get in here. This is bad because the last one is insanely intense, right? So, how do I clear corruption? You rest in your defender's heart or any big place you're gonna have. Essentially, it's gonna clear out all the corruption and then you can start over again. Now, in this game, unlike many games, you can toggle between turn-based and real-time mode. For fighting, mostly. This enables you to do some good things. Now, obviously, both modes have their preferred audience. I am a turn-based mode guy, but I'll talk about it just because it's important for new players to understand how to use every tool they're able to do. Now, what are the benefits of turn-based mode? Well, as you can see, things happen much slower and I can choose exactly what I want to do. So if I want to, like, let's say, walk forward and use a spell on them, I can. Now they both succeeded, which is not great, but I can. If I want to walk behind them and prepare for a flank, I also can. If I want to just walk somewhere and shoot them once, done deal. And now I can just charge at him. And you can see how turn-based mode is really good, but it's even better for casters, right? So let's say I just want to cast something on him. I don't have to worry about anything. And I can take all my time to read all of my spells. This is mostly important when I have a lot of spells like Grease and everything, right? So I'll just cast everything I can. So he's gonna go. He's gonna buff himself, and then I'm just gonna go ahead and kill him. Now in turn-based mode, this fight would have been super easy, just as it was in real-time mode. But some fights become really difficult, and you won't always notice what the enemy spellcaster is doing. Therefore, you kind of need all the help you can get. Turn-based modes lets you do everything. You can use all of your characters to their fullest, and maybe the most important of all is that you can read the combat log really easily in between every single turn, which is insanely good. I won't get into much details of this fight, but this is the reason why turn-based mode and real-time mode exist for fights like these, because the game was designed for real-time mode, and this is an insanely long fight. I won't get into how it happens, but it just happens, and it's really early on, so don't worry about spoilers. But for all that matters, you're gonna need a lot of things, because all of these people have turns. Therefore, if you don't want to just lose all of your life and all of your time here, it's gonna be useful to just play on turn-based. Now, I put this on easy because I don't like being buttered by turn-based, but yeah, essentially you're gonna need a lot of time to do this. I think in non-turn-based this fight lasts what, 5 minutes, but in turn-based it can last many hours. That was just the point I wanted to make. Finally, one of the last 2 things you're gonna ask me. Well, what about the party? Which companion should I get? Because there are a lot of companions. Are they optimized? Well, no, they aren't, but you can do just fine with them. I always feel like in these games, if I'm using the main character and I don't use the main companions, I'm kind of missing out on the experience. You can, however, hire mercenaries if you want. You can spec them from level 1 and they will be as good as you want them to be. Now, what party formation should you have? I usually recommend 1 tank, 1 healer, and the rest is pretty much up to you. One support can always be good, but most of the time you should be fine. You can also respect your companions, but they will start the same level as you got them, which means that Ember, which I got at level 3, will always stay level 3 no matter what. I can't redistribute her stat, so her con of -1 is really hurting. But besides that, the companions should be fine. I'm thinking of maybe replacing Wolfjif with an healer, but that's about what I will do on this playthrough. Now the last few things I wanted to touch about is the mythic paths. Now I'm not going to show you anything because I don't want to spoil it. I think it's one of the best features of the game, and I don't think it's fair for me to just show you everything. I think you should just read what the names are and see which one you'd like to go for, but the game does a pretty good job at fitting you into the ones you might want depending on your choices. Now, for balance reasons, they are all fairly good. Some are going to be better than others, obviously, for certain classes, but they all have game-breaking abilities, and they are all great. I wanted to go in blind, but I figured there was a Lich class, spoilers ahead, and I just decided to make a Lich character. But you can go any of them, and they are all great. Your companions will also get mythic abilities, so they will grow in strength with you. But the game's endgame is looking to be really good. The last thing I wanted to show you was the encyclopedia. Now, if you ever miss something in the tutorial, you can just go here and look at everything. Now, all I talked about here is mostly here. That's great. And I'll just say this right now. They are really good. The tutorials are really, really good now. Before they weren't, but like damage reduction, you can see exactly why. It's pretty good. The last game they were really bad, but this game they are really, really good. They stepped it up because they knew that the game was difficult enough. So here you can see all the bonus base attack power, ability score, and everything, how everything is calculated. You can see the die and everything. That's gonna wrap it up for me, guys. If you enjoyed this and you stayed till here, please make sure to like and subscribe. I'm currently doing a playthrough of Wrath of the Righteous, streaming here on YouTube and re-uploading the VODs. But if that's not your cup of tea, soon I will be starting Tales of Arise. This weekend I have to do something, but starting next week I will be streaming Tales of Arise also. So don't miss it. Stay safe and wreck some demon butt.